This video is sponsored by Squarespace. So recently I was going through some older Lightroom catalogs of mine, some older catalogs containing some of my older landscape photography images, and I came across a number of mistakes. And I want to start here with one mistake, which thankfully I did not make. When I go back through my image catalog, and by the way, I want to talk about this in a minute, but when I go back through, this old image catalog of mine, these are a bunch of images from Lofoten, Norway, from a trip that I took there a number of years ago. Pretty nice light here, actually. I have no idea why my camera is at level, but anyway, beautiful scene, and I have loads of images like this. Probably like 98, 99% of the images that I took on this trip when I was there, I haven't done a thing with. I haven't done anything with them. They're just sitting on my hard drive. Logic would tell you that, well, if you're not going to do anything with them, then you should get rid of them, right? The problem with doing so, however, is that you are losing an opportunity to be learning from your older images, an opportunity for you to go back and, look at images and have a more objective eye of your image now that, a fair amount of time has passed and you're no longer as emotionally connected to the scene or the environment or the trip or anything like that. And there's also the opportunity to find needles in the haystack. You never know. You could go back and you could find some older images, which for whatever reason you just skipped over, you didn't notice. If you have the space and you have the means to do so, hold on to as many images from the past as you possibly can. Okay, so the first real mistake that I made, and I did this repeatedly back then, leave my camera in exposure bracketing mode. In other words, for every image that I took, the camera would capture additional images, typically like one stop over or one stop under, or some variation on that. Sometimes even like 5 exposures if I really was feeling crazy that day. I have loads of space. I have tons of SD cards. I have a whole case full of SD cards, a ton of them, and there's no harm, no foul in taking loads and loads of images and bracketing my exposure because it's digital. Right? And I can always get rid of a digital image. I can always delete it thereafter. There are so many situations where bracketing was not necessary. There was no reason to be bracketing my exposure. And obviously it's been years and I have not cleaned out any of these bracketed frames, any of these additional bracketed images. Maybe you're better at this than I am. Maybe you're better at managing your work than I am, but I have a tendency to just import images, work on ones, and then move on and shoot more stuff, import more, and then I end up with just a hard drive full of images, lots and lots of additional images, which didn't need to be created in the first place. And I know that HDR was not necessary, or bracketing my exposure was not necessary, because, for example, if we look at this image here. This is a good example here. If we take a look at the histogram, the histogram is perfectly healthy. Had I paid attention to the histogram on the back of my camera, I would have seen that there's plenty of tonal information sitting between black at far left and white at far right. It's very healthy. It's very malleable. There's no clipping. There's no problems here. There was no need to be bracketing this image. And yet, for whatever reason, I was like, well, I got to protect my highlights. I got to be careful. I got to, make sure there's no noise in my shadows or whatever. So I just keep taking more and more bracketed images. And then sometimes I would make the mistake of creating an HDR file simply because I had multiple images to work with. In my mind, I thought, well, I have these extra exposures here. Why not create an HDR file from all of these different images, and then I'll edit that HDR image instead? Well, sometimes there's nothing at all wrong with doing that. However, I have found in my experience from creating countless HDR composites in Lightroom is that the HDR tool is not 100%. It's not perfect. And sometimes those mistakes you don't notice until you start editing that HDR image, or rather you're like a little ways down the road with that HDR image. You've added some contrast, you've been adjusting the colors, you've been, editing the image. And then all of a sudden you'll notice that there's a weird little edge. There's a weird little, place where the images were not composited quite right. The pixels don't overlap cleanly. So in my opinion, at least, there is no reason to be using that HDR blend mode unless you truly need to create an HDR image. Don't just use it for the sake of using it because you have multiple images to work with, because that can lead to problems later on. Before we move on here, I want to share with you a quick example of where bracketing exposure was the right thing to do, where I'm glad that I bracketed my exposure. Okay, so this is a series of images from out west in New Mexico, and let's see, this is the base exposure here. This is the one that was, this is like the normally exposed image here. And then I have one that is 1.5 stops over and another which is 1.5 stops under. Now, if we go back to the original image here and take a look at the histogram up here, you'll see that the histogram is not bad. You can see that there's a little bit of a gap down here at the far left end, meaning that, there are no, true black pixels in this image. So I have not clipped my blacks. And there's also no whites, like pure whites in the image either. You can see that there's a little bit of a gap up there at the top. So yes, this is an image that, I could have, gotten away with without having to bracket my exposure, but I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I bracketed. And let me show you why. Let's begin with the shadows. And we're going to compare this image here to this one here, which was 1.5 stops over. And let's raise exposure 1.5 stops. And so now this image is pretty close to this one here. This is the base exposure here with the lifted exposure. And this is the one that I deliberately overexposed. There is definitely elevated noise in the shadows down here. There is definitely elevated noise there because when pixels get dark, when they get dark and shadowy in your camera, and it doesn't matter what kind of camera it is that you're shooting with, you can oftentimes get elevated noise in those regions. And when you have noise, well, you tend to lose fine detail and sharpness in those areas because the noise takes over. The noise just tends to blur and kind of average the details together. So you tend to lose some fidelity in those areas. Anyway, so there's definitely some noise in the shadows. And now let's take a look at the other image. And I'm actually going to reset this back to where it was when it was captured straight out of camera. And now we are going to compare this image to this one here. This is one that was shot 1.5 stops under in order to more properly expose the sky. This time I'm going to pull down my exposure 1.5 stops. And so now my base exposure is more similar, as you can see, to the one that was captured in camera at 1.5 stops under. And if we zoom in here and take a look at the sky is similar, yet different. The image with the lowered exposure in the develop panel has some hue shifting going on up here in the sky. It's more orange. It's especially noticeable here, I think. There's like some strange little, some unevenness in the sky. And there's also just the shift of the hue as well. This one over here on the right, which was captured naturally in camera at 1.5 stops under. This is a more authentic capture of the color in the sky. Whereas this one over here is struggling because those pixels were pushed so far up towards white. And the closer pixels get to white, the more color they lose, the less saturated those pixels are. So when you recover those pixels that are pretty close up towards white, when you pull them down, their color oftentimes isn't accurate. Their color tends to shift. It tends to be a little bit off, or maybe you'll just get like grayish kind of pixels because there's no color information sometimes, for the software to be working with when it is demosaicing your raw file. If you are out in the field shooting and you see a lot of pixels all compressed down here at the left end of the histogram, and you also see a bunch of pixels compressed up here at the right, and maybe even they're starting to curve upwards, pay attention to that. And if you see that, switch your camera over into exposure bracketing mode, maybe even make it a custom mode on your camera. That is something that I did so I can quickly switch between single exposures and bracketed exposures without having to dig through my menu settings. Just keep an eye on the histogram, and if you see that being a problem, then that is a good time to be bracketing your exposure. Otherwise, if the histogram looks healthy, as I talked about before, you don't necessarily need it. Another mistake people can oftentimes make with their photography is only uploading their images to social media instead of building a proper portfolio website of their work, which you can absolutely do using the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Showcasing your photography, your creative work with a professionally designed and engineered website which looks great right out of the box on desktop displays, on laptops, on tablets, on mobile devices is a really important thing to do, and a really easy thing to do with Squarespace, because you don't have to learn how to design a website. You don't have to learn how to code or anything like that. You basically just walk through the process of creating a new website by answering some questions about the kind of site that you're looking for, and the Squarespace AI system will build a new website for you. But if you'd rather not use AI for this, Squarespace has a number of pre-built templates that you can jump in and immediately start using. Upload your images, sort, collect them, and group them into galleries however you want to showcase them, however you want to share them with others. And then once you have a Squarespace website, it's super easy to add on additional features like email marketing if you want to build an audience of followers and keep in touch with them. You can also sell digital products and downloads through your website as well. Squarespace makes it super easy for you to do, so you don't have to hire anybody to help you out. You can absolutely do it yourself by heading over to squarespace.com/Dominey. Sign up for a free 30-day trial. It's not going to cost you a thing. You're not going to have to enter your credit card or anything like that. But at the end of that 30-day trial, if you do decide to keep Squarespace, use my last name, Dominey, to save 10% off a new website or domain. All right, the next mistake I want to share with you is something that I see oftentimes when going back through older images of mine. I guess in a way, it's not really a mistake. It's just something that I think I was thinking a little too hard about at the time. I was not thinking clearly about. This is totally tangential here, and this is not the point that I want to make, but I just want to quickly share with you that these images drive me crazy. Every time I look at these images, they just really, really bother me because I did not compose this image well, or any of these images here well. And really, I guess in my own defense, mobility was somewhat limited. You're kind of stuck with what you have. It's kind of hard to change your position sometimes. But the main fault of this image here is this giant chasm of just dead space in the middle. In between the foreground and the background back here. And the background is fantastic. I mean, look at this sky and this light that's happening back here. Actually, if I just turn up the contrast a little bit and maybe pull down the exposure some, you can see the light, right? I mean, look at that. Fantastic light going on there in the background. And I just totally cropped it. I totally cropped it on the top. I should have gotten myself lower or changed my angle or something. And I think I also had I had one of those square rectangular filter boxes on the front of my lens, as evidenced by this, what they call mechanical vignette there, because it wasn't quite rotated right. And yeah, this is the kind of stuff that drives me bananas. I look at these images, I'm like, man, what a lost opportunity. If I could go back in time and turn back the clock, I would totally do it differently. But anyway, and this is, again, part of the reason why you keep older images, right? I mean, as painful as they are to look at, I mean, sometimes they really can be good learning tools. But anyway, this I hinted at earlier. This is something I used to do. I used to always carry around a white balance card in my wallet with me. It's a pretty cool little card. It's the size of a credit card, easy to carry. And basically, it's really simple. What it allows you to do is just use the eyedropper in Lightroom or whatever app you're using. You click on it, and the white balance in your image is then corrected. It is perfectly neutral. The card is perfectly neutral. The gray that's in that card is perfectly neutral, which means that all the other colors, all the other neutrals in the image will also be neutral, which means that then the colors in the image will be correct. So somehow I got myself into the mindset that if I brought a card like this, I could take images with it and it would provide me with a quick and easy and accurate way to be fixing the white balance in my image, because I wouldn't have to look for something neutral in the image. I wouldn't have to look for a cloud or gray asphalt, or a rock or something like that. I had a card, it was ready to go, and I could just use that eyedropper like I just demonstrated to fix the white balance in the image, to fix the color cast in the image. And what I didn't fully appreciate at the time, I don't feel like I thought deeply enough about this at the time. In order for that card that you're looking at here, in order for that card to actually be neutral, the light coming from the sun would also have to be neutral. because the color of the card that you see is the light that is bouncing off of the card back into your eyes coming from the sun. So the only time of day when that card would actually be neutral in the environment, in that scene, would be at the least optimal time of day, like around high noon, early afternoon, when the sun is super high in the sky, pointed straight down, and you typically get, contrasty images then. You typically get low saturated images. You typically get rather flat, kind of dull looking images at that time of day. So why in the world would I want to, fix my, correct my white balance and make it look like the image was taken at high noon in the middle of the day? Like, that is totally not desirable at all. And I didn't think enough about the fact that the color of light changes all throughout the day. The sun is very rarely neutral. Other times of day, it's cooler, it's warmer. It all depends on when you're shooting, but it is very rarely neutral. So it doesn't really make sense to have a spectrally neutral gray in your image unless you truly need to, shoot with an accurate white balance, unless you really, really need clean, perfectly neutral neutrals and grays in your image for some reason. Otherwise, it's not something you should be bothering with. And actually, let me just find a good example here. Okay, yeah, like these images here, like these were taken at blue hour, very early in the morning, very long shutter speeds, 6 seconds. If we were to use the eyedropper here, and let's just, try to find something that's, somewhat white, we can use the snow. Let's just do that. And now all of the snow is perfectly neutral. All of it has been neutralized. There's no longer any color in it at all. Same is true for the sky up here. Everything is flat and gray. But of course, the reds that you see on the side of the, that you see here on the sides of the homes and everything. I mean, yes, they are a more correct red. They don't have that blue color cast that they did before. But for all intents and purposes, this image appears to have been taken in the middle of the day. It is nothing like the moment in which the image was actually taken, which had light like this, which is more natural. Now, you may not like the heaviness of the blue, and of course there's things you can do to mitigate that. You could soften it. You could add a little bit of yellow in order to offset it a little bit or desaturate the blue some. But the thing that I've really grown to appreciate, and I feel like understand better now, is to work with the grain of the image, to work with the light that you had, with the color of light that you had in the moment. Because as soon as you start trying to correct it and, fix the white balance of it, it removes the character of the image. It removes the authenticity of the image when you are creating landscape images outdoors. Now, of course, if you're doing like brand work, product photography work, portraits, something like that, where where your skin tones need to be absolutely perfect and right, those are situations which, yeah, you would want a correct white balance and you wouldn't want that color cast. But when doing landscape work like this, I think it's more important to maintain the original color of the scene. And in order to shoot like this, by the way, I would not recommend setting your camera to auto white balance. That's another mistake that I used to make. I used to always shoot just an auto white balance and let my camera fix everything, fix everything for me. And then I would end up with a bunch of, just kind of like gray, flat, drab looking images. And then I have to figure out how to, push color in to make those grays less gray and less neutral by split toning or, doing whatever, when I could have just, worked with what I had. So I think the takeaway here is, one, just remember that the color of light is always going to change. It's always going to be different throughout the day, and it's very rarely going to be neutral, and odds are you probably don't want it to be perfectly neutral. Second thing, I recommend turning off auto white balance unless you absolutely need it. Set your camera to a fixed color temperature like 5600 or 5500 Kelvin, something like that, whatever you prefer. The point is that the more neutral your camera is, it's not going to try and correct or compensate for blue light or golden light or anything like that. It's not going to try and make your neutrals neutral, which can throw you off later on when you're importing images. When your color temperature is neutral in your camera, it almost functions like a pass-through for the environment in the scene and the natural color of light that that you are creating, because it's not trying to compensate. It's not trying to push it cooler or to push it warmer in order to make the neutrals neutral or anything like that. And you're also not setting it to some weird, not really weird, but you're not also using a different color temperature, which could, basically just cause you even more problems. When you have it set to like a very neutral 5500 or 5600 Kelvin color temperature, you get that pass through, and then you get more accurate, more authentic color in your images when you took them. I don't know about you, but that is what I want. Like, that is what I want my images to reflect, the moment that I was there and I took the image. That is way more important to me than having spectrally neutral grays, in my images. All right, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, please do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up down below. I would appreciate it. And remember to subscribe to this channel as well if you want to keep in touch with me in the future. Enable the notification, click on that bell icon down there if you want to be notified when a new video on my channel goes live. And that's it. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I'll see you next time.